The mining facility on Europa was a cold, lifeless hell. The Krylos had stripped the moon of its beauty, turning it into a jagged wasteland of ice and metal. Captain Elias Voss stood on the observation deck, his breath fogging the reinforced glass as he stared out at the endless expanse of white. Below him, hundreds of human workers toiled in the frozen darkness, their movements sluggish under the weight of their exosuits and the oppressive gaze of Krylos overseers. Elias clenched his fists, the memory of Earth burning in his mind. He had been there when the Krylos Dominion arrived, a sleek, black armada blotting out the stars. He had fought in the last stand of the Earth Defense Force, watching as cities crumbled and oceans boiled under the Dominion's weapons. And he had been there when the Krylos declared humanity a resource species, fit only for labor and obedience. A sharp beep from his wrist terminal snapped him back to the present. It was a routine inspection alert, but Elias felt a flicker of unease. The Krylos were meticulous, and any deviation from protocol could mean death, or worse, reconditioning. He descended into the mines, his boots crunching against the icy floor. The workers avoided his gaze, their faces hollow and resigned. Elias hated that look. He hated that he had become part of the machine that put it there. Deep in the mines, he found the source of the alert. A collapsed tunnel. The Krylos overseer, a hulking reptilian figure clad in gleaming armor, barked orders at the workers to clear the debris. Elias joined them, his hands numb from the cold as he hauled chunks of ice and rock. It was then that he saw it, a glint of metal buried in the rubble. Curiosity overcame caution. Elias dug deeper, his heart pounding as he uncovered the wreckage of an ancient human warship. Ital was scared and blackened, but the insignia of the Earth Defense Force was still visible. A surge of pride and grief washed over him. He reached out, brushing away the frost, and found a data chip embedded in the console. The chip was old, its casing cracked and corroded, but it still emitted a faint glow. Elias hesitated. If the Krylos found it, they would destroy it. And him. But if it contained something valuable, something that could help humanity. He slipped the chip into his pocket just as the overseer approached. "What is this?" The Krylos growled, its voice a guttural rumble. "Just debris," Elias replied, keeping his tone neutral. "The tunnel is clear." The overseer studied him with cold, reptilian eyes before nodding. "Return to your station." That night, Elias activated the chip in the privacy of his quarters. The holographic display flickered to life, revealing a message in bold, glowing letters. "The chains of Sol will break. Find us at Charon." Elias's breath caught. Charon, Pluto's moon. It was a suicide mission, but the thought of hope, of defiance, ignited something in him that he thought had died long ago. The part ends with Elias making his decision. He sabotages the mining facility's power grid, creating a diversion, and steals a Krylos transport ship. As he hurtles into the void, the Dominion's patrol ships hot on his tail, he whispers to himself, "For Earth." The stolen Krylos transport ship shuddered as Elias pushed its engines to the limit. Alarms blared, and the console flashed warnings in the Dominion's harsh, angular script. Behind him, 2 Krylos patrol ships closed in, their weapons charging. Elias gripped the controls, his knuckles white, and veered sharply to avoid a volley of plasma fire. The ship's hull groaned in protest, but it held. Come on," Elias muttered, his eyes darting to the navigation screen. Pluto was still hours away, and the patrol ships were relentless. He activated the ship's emergency thrusters, sacrificing stability for speed. The transport lurched forward, and Elias felt the G-forces press him into his seat. The chase stretched on, a deadly game of cat and mouse through the asteroid belt. Elias used every trick he knew, weaving through the rocky debris to throw off his pursuers. But the Krylos were skilled hunters, and their ships were faster. Just as Elias thought he was cornered, an idea struck him. He aimed the transport toward a massive asteroid, its surface pockmarked with deep crevices. "Let's see how much you want me," he said, gritting his teeth. The transport plunged into the asteroid's shadow, its engines screaming. The patrol ships followed, but their bulk made them less maneuverable. Elias skimmed the surface, dodging jagged outcrops, until he found what he was looking for, a narrow canyon. He guided the transport into the gap, the ship's wings scraping against the walls. One of the patrol ships attempted to follow but clipped the edge of the canyon and spun out of control, crashing into the asteroid. The other ship broke off, unwilling to risk further damage. Elias let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. He emerged from the canyon and set a course for Pluto, his heart still racing. The transport was battered, but it was still flying. When Charon finally came into view, Elias felt a mix of relief and apprehension. The moon was a barren, icy rock, its surface dotted with ancient mining facilities long abandoned by the Krylos. According to the data chip, the resistance was here, but there was no sign of life. Elias guided the transport to a landing pad near one of the larger structures and stepped out into the freezing air. The facility was dark and silent, its doors sealed. Elias approached cautiously, his hand hovering near the sidearm he'd taken from the transport. Just as he reached the entrance, a voice crackled over his comms. "Identify yourself." Elias froze. "My name is Captain Elias Voss. I'm here to find the resistance." There was a pause. Then the voice replied, "Prove it." Elias held up the data chip. "I have this." It led me here. The doors hissed open, revealing a dimly lit corridor. Elias stepped inside, his breath visible in the cold air. He was met by a group of armed figures, their faces hidden behind helmets. One of them stepped forward, removing their helmet to reveal a woman with sharp features and piercing green eyes. "I'm Commander Lyra Talon," she said, her voice firm but not unkind. "You've got guts coming here, Voss. Let's see if you've got what it takes to join us." The part ends with Elias being led deeper into the facility, where he sees the Resistance's hidden fleet for the first time. A collection of sleek, human-designed warships, their hulls gleaming under the dim lights. Lyra turns to him, a faint smile on her lips. "Welcome to the fight, Captain." The Resistance base on Charon was a labyrinth of tunnels and chambers carved into the moon's icy crust. Elias followed Lyra through the dimly lit corridors, his eyes darting to the makeshift barracks, repair bays, and command centers bustling with activity. The air was thick with the hum of machinery and the low murmur of voices, but there was an undercurrent of tension, a sense that every moment was borrowed, every breath a defiance of the Dominion. Lyra led him to a war room, where a holographic map of the solar system hovered above a circular table. A dozen Resistance leaders stood around it, their faces grim. Elias recognized some of them. Veterans of the Earth Defense Force, scientists, engineers, and even a few former politicians. They turned to him as he entered, their expressions a mix of curiosity and skepticism. "This is Captain Elias Voss," Lyra announced. "He's the one who brought us the data chip." A tall man with graying hair stepped forward, his arms crossed. "And how do we know he's not a Dominion spy?" Elias met the man's gaze without flinching. "If I were a spy, I wouldn't have risked my life to get here. I've seen what the Krylos do to us. I'm done running." The room fell silent. Lyra nodded, seemingly satisfied. "We don't have time for distrust. The Dominion is closing in on us, and we need every capable hand we can get." She turned to Elias. "You mentioned a plan. Let's hear it." Elias stepped forward, his heart pounding. "The Krylos have a weapon, a quantum singularity cannon. It's powerful enough to destroy entire fleets. If we can steal the schematics, we can build our own and level the playing field." The room erupted into murmurs. "And how do you propose we do that?" someone asked. "We infiltrate Krithar Prime," Elias said. "Their capital. It's the only place the schematics will be stored." The skepticism in the room was palpable. "That's suicide," the gray-haired man said. "Even if we could get past their defenses, we'd never make it out alive." We don't have a choice, Elias shot back. If we don't take this risk, we're just waiting for the Dominion to crush us. I'd rather die fighting than live on my knees. Lyra studied him for a moment, then nodded. He's right. We've been hiding long enough. It's time to strike back. She turned to the room. Prepare a team. We leave in 48 hours. The next 2 days were a blur of preparation. Elias was introduced to the team. Jackson, a wiry hacker with a sharp tongue and sharper skills. Mara, a former Marine with a knack for explosives. And Zara, a Krylos defector whose knowledge of Dominion systems was invaluable. Elias was wary of Zara. Her reptilian features and cold demeanor were a constant reminder of the enemy. But Lyra assured him she could be trusted. As the team boarded a stolen Krylos freighter, Elias felt a mix of excitement and dread. The plan was risky, but it was their best shot. The freighter's engines roared to life, and they launched into the void, setting course for Krithar Prime. The part ends with the team approaching the Dominion's capital, the planet's sprawling cities and towering spires visible through the viewport. Zara turned to Elias, her golden eyes glinting in the dim light. Once we land, there's no turning back, she said. Elias nodded, his jaw set. We knew that when we signed up. The Krylos freighter descended through the atmosphere of Krithar Prime, its hull glowing from the heat of re-entry. Elias sat in the cockpit, his hands gripping the armrests as the ship shuddered violently. Outside, the planet's sprawling capital city came into view, a labyrinth of towering spires, neon-lit streets, and sprawling industrial complexes. The sheer scale of it was overwhelming, a testament to the Dominion's power and ruthlessness. Zara, seated at the navigation console, input the landing code she had stolen during her defection. We're cleared for docking at Sector 12, she said, her voice calm but tense. Stay sharp. One wrong move, and we're dead. The freighter touched down on a landing pad near the heart of the city. Elias and the team donned Krylos disguises, hooded cloaks and masks that concealed their human features. They stepped out into the bustling streets, blending in with the crowds of reptilian citizens and robotic enforcers. The air was thick with the scent of ozone and the hum of machinery, and the sky was crisscrossed with hovering transports and patrol drones. Jackson led the way, his handheld device scanning for security systems and surveillance cameras. The archives of Dominion are 3 clicks north, he muttered. Heavily guarded, but I can disable their sensors if we get close enough. The team moved quickly, sticking to the shadows and avoiding eye contact with the Krylos. Elias's heart pounded with every step, his mind racing with the possibilities of failure. They were so close, but one mistake could doom them all. As they approached the archives, a massive structure of black metal and glowing blue veins, Zara held up a hand. Wait, she whispered. There's a patrol ahead. Elias peered around the corner and saw a squad of Krylos soldiers marching toward them, their weapons at the ready. He signaled for the team to hide, and they ducked into an alleyway, pressing themselves against the wall. The soldiers passed by without noticing them, but the close call left Elias's nerves frayed. We need to move faster, Mara said, her voice low. Every second we're out here is a risk. Jackson nodded and activated his device, sending a pulse that disabled the archive's external sensors. The team slipped through a side entrance, their footsteps echoing in the dimly lit corridors. The interior of the archives was a maze of data terminals, holographic displays, and towering servers. Zara guided them to the central vault, where the quantum singularity cannon schematics were stored. This is it, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Jackson, can you bypass the lock? Jackson stepped forward, his fingers flying over the keypad. Piece of cake, he said with a grin. The vault door hissed open, revealing a glowing holographic display of the schematics. Elias felt a surge of triumph as he activated the data chip, downloading the information. But then alarms blared, and the lights turned red. We've been made, Mara shouted, drawing her weapon. Jackson cursed, his device flashing warnings. They've locked down the building. We're trapped. Elias's mind raced. We need an exit. Now. Zora pointed to a ventilation shaft. This way. It'll take us to the lower levels. The team scrambled into the shaft, crawling through the narrow passage as the sound of approaching footsteps grew louder. Elias's heart pounded as he realized the truth. They had been betrayed. The part ends with the team emerging into a maintenance tunnel, only to be confronted by a squad of Krylos soldiers. Jackson stepped forward, a smirk on his face, and raised his hands. "Sorry, folks," he said, "but the Dominion pays better." The betrayal hit Elias like a punch to the gut. Jackson's smirk was a knife twisting in his chest as the Krylos soldiers surrounded them, their weapons trained on the team. Mara cursed, her finger twitching on the trigger of her weapon, but Elias held up a hand. "Don't," he said, his voice low. "We're outnumbered." Zara's golden eyes flicked to Elias, her expression unreadable. He's right. Fighting now would be suicide. Jackson chuckled, stepping back to stand with the Krylos. "Smart move, Captain. You always were a quick thinker." Elias glared at him, his fists clenched. "Why, Jackson? Why sell us out?" Jackson shrugged. "The Dominion offered me a better deal. Simple as that. You should have known loyalty doesn't pay." Before Elias could respond, a Krylos officer stepped forward, his armor gleaming under the harsh lights. "Enough. Take them to High Inquisitor Vrax." The soldiers moved in, confiscating the team's weapons and binding their hands. Elias's mind raced as they were marched through the tunnels, trying to think of a way out. But the odds were impossible. They were deep in enemy territory, surrounded by hundreds of Krylos. They were brought to a high-security prison complex, a grim fortress of black metal and flickering energy barriers. The air was thick with the scent of ozone and the faint hum of machinery. Elias was separated from the others and thrown into a cell, the door slamming shut behind him with a finality that made his stomach churn. Hours passed, or maybe days. It was hard to tell in the windowless cell. Elias sat on the cold floor, his mind replaying the events that had led them here. He had trusted Jackson, and that trust had cost them everything. The thought gnawed at him, a bitter reminder of his failure. Finally, the cell door hissed open, and 2 Krylos guards entered, dragging Elias to his feet. They marched him down a series of corridors to an interrogation room, where High Inquisitor Vrax waited. Vrax was a towering figure, his reptilian features sharp and menacing. His eyes, a cold, calculating yellow, studied Elias as he was forced into a chair. The room was bare except for a single table and a holographic display of the quantum singularity cannon schematics. "Captain Elias Voss," Vrax said, his voice a low guttural rumble. "You've caused us quite a bit of trouble." Elias met his gaze, refusing to show fear. "I'll take that as a compliment." Vrax smirked, revealing rows of sharp teeth. "Brave words for a man in your position, but bravery won't save you now." The interrogation began, a brutal process designed to break Elias' spirit. Vrax used every tool at his disposal: physical pain, psychological manipulation, and even holographic projections of Earth's destruction. But Elias held firm, drawing strength from the memory of his fallen comrades and the hope of a free humanity. "You're wasting your time," Elias said through gritted teeth after hours of torment. "I'll never betray my people." Vrax leaned in close, his breath hot on Elias's face. "We'll see about that." Meanwhile, in another part of the prison, Zara and Mara were being held in adjacent cells. Zara's mind raced as she formulated a plan. She had spent years studying Krylos systems, and she knew the prison's weaknesses. "Mara," she whispered through the energy barrier separating them, "can you create a diversion?" Mara grinned, despite the bruises on her face. "Just say the word." Zara nodded. "On my signal." The part ends with Zara activating a hidden device in her wrist implant, disabling the energy barriers. The prison alarms blared as chaos erupted, and Zara and Mara fought their way through the guards, determined to rescue Elias. The prison alarm screamed like a wounded beast, their shrill tones echoing through the cold, metallic corridors. Zara moved with precision, her Krylos-enhanced reflexes allowing her to disarm a guard with a swift, calculated strike. Mara was a whirlwind of violence beside her, using a stolen baton to deliver brutal blows to anyone who got in their way. The two women fought as a unit, their movements synchronized despite the chaos around them. Elias's cell is 2 levels up, Zara said, her voice calm but urgent. We need to move fast before they lock down the entire facility. Mara nodded, her breathing heavy but steady. Lead the way. They sprinted through the corridors, dodging energy blasts and taking down guards with ruthless efficiency. Zara's knowledge of Krylos systems proved invaluable. She bypassed security doors and disabled surveillance cameras with a few taps on her wrist implant. But the prison was vast, and time was running out. When they finally reached Elias's cell, they found him slumped in a chair, his face bruised and bloodied, but his eyes still burning with defiance. High Inquisitor Vrax stood over him, a cruel smile playing on his reptilian lips. Ah, the defector and the Marine, Vrax said, turning to face them. I was wondering when you'd show up. Zara didn't hesitate. She lunged at Vrax, her movements a blur of speed and precision. But Vrax was no ordinary Krylos. He was a seasoned warrior, and he met her attack with a brutal counterstrike. The two clashed in a flurry of blows, their movements too fast for Mara to follow. Elias, Mara shouted, rushing to his side. She cut his restraints with a stolen knife and helped him to his feet. Can you walk? Elias winced but nodded. I've had worse. The sound of reinforcements echoed down the corridor, and Mara knew they were running out of time. She grabbed a fallen guard's weapon and tossed it to Elias. We need to go. Now. Elias caught the weapon and turned to Zara, who was still locked in combat with Vrax. We can't leave her. We don't have a choice. Mara snapped. If we don't move, we're all dead. But Zara had other plans. With a final, desperate move, she disarmed Vrax and drove him back with a series of rapid strikes. Go, she shouted to Elias and Mara. I'll hold him off. Elias hesitated, but Mara grabbed his arm and pulled him toward the exit. She knows what she's doing. Trust her. The two of them ran, their footsteps echoing in the narrow corridors. Behind them, they could hear the sounds of Zara's battle with Vrax, the clash of metal and the roar of fury. But they didn't look back. They couldn't afford to. When they finally reached the prison's lower levels, they found a maintenance hatch that led to the city's underground tunnels. Mara pried it open, and they dropped into the darkness below. The tunnels were damp and cold, the air thick with the scent of mildew and machinery. Elias leaned against the wall, his breath coming in ragged gasps. We can't leave her, he said again, his voice filled with guilt. Mara shook her head. Zara made her choice. She bought us time, and we need to use it. The part ends with Elias and Mara navigating the tunnels, their path illuminated by the faint glow of Mara's flashlight. Above them, the sounds of the prison alarms faded, but the weight of Zara's sacrifice hung heavy in the air. Elias and Mara emerged from the tunnels into the cold, dim light of Krithar Prime's industrial district. The city loomed above them, its towering spires and neon-lit streets a stark contrast to the grimy underbelly they had just escaped. Elias's body ached from the ordeal, but his mind was sharp, focused on one goal, getting back to Charon Station with the quantum singularity cannon schematics. We need a ship, Mara said, scanning the area. Something small and fast. Elias nodded, his eyes narrowing as he spotted a Krylos patrol shuttle parked nearby. That'll do. The two of them moved quickly, using the shadows to their advantage. The shuttle was guarded by 2 Krylos soldiers, but Mara took them down with silent efficiency, her combat skills as sharp as ever. Elias accessed the shuttle's control panel, bypassing the security system with the skills he had honed during his time in the mines. Let's hope this thing has enough fuel to get us out of here, Elias muttered as the shuttle's engines roared to life. They lifted off just as a Krylos patrol arrived, their weapons firing wildly at the fleeing shuttle. Elias maneuvered the ship with expert precision, dodging plasma blasts and weaving through the city's towering structures. The shuttle's alarms blared as it sustained damage, but Elias pushed it to its limits, determined to escape. When they finally broke through the atmosphere and entered the cold void of space, Elias let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. "We're not out of the woods yet," he said, checking the shuttle systems. "The Dominion will send ships after us." Mara nodded, her eyes fixed on the navigation screen. "We need to get to the rendezvous point. The Resistance fleet should be waiting for us." The journey was tense, every moment filled with the fear of being caught. But as they approached the edge of Krylos space, they were met by a sight that filled Elias with hope. A fleet of human warships, their hulls gleaming under the light of a distant star. "This is Captain Elias Voss," he said over the comms, requesting permission to dock. The response came immediately. "Permission granted, Captain. Welcome back." As they docked with the Resistance flagship, Elias and Mara were greeted by Commander Lyra Talon. Her expression was grim but determined. "We've been monitoring the situation," she said. "The Dominion is mobilizing their fleet. We don't have much time." Elias handed her the data chip containing the quantum singularity cannon schematics. "We got what we came for. Now let's make it count." The Resistance fleet worked around the clock to build the cannon, using every resource at their disposal. But as the final components were put into place, the Dominion fleet arrived, their ships blotting out the stars. The Battle of Sol began with a deafening roar, the two fleets clashing in a storm of plasma fire and explosions. The Resistance fought valiantly, but the Dominion's numbers were overwhelming. Elias stood on the bridge of the flagship, his eyes fixed on the quantum singularity cannon. "Fire it," he ordered. The cannon activated, its energy beam tearing through the Dominion fleet like a blade through paper. But the victory was short-lived. The cannon's power source began to fail, its energy reserves draining rapidly. "We need to retreat," Lyra said, her voice filled with urgency. Elias shook his head. "No, we finish this now." The part ends with Elias devising a desperate plan to lure the Dominion fleet into a trap, knowing it could mean the end of the Resistance, but also their only chance for victory. The Resistance fleet was in shambles. The quantum singularity cannon had dealt a devastating blow to the Dominion, but its power source was failing, and the enemy was regrouping. Elias stood on the bridge of the flagship, his mind racing as he stared at the holographic display of the battlefield. The Dominion fleet, though crippled, was still vast, and their flagship, a monstrous vessel bristling with weapons, was closing in. "We need to take out their command ship," Elias said, his voice steady despite the chaos around him. "If we can destroy it, the rest of the fleet will fall into disarray." Commander Lyra Talon nodded, her expression grim. "But how? We're out of options." Elias turned to her, his eyes blazing with determination. "We used the cannon one last time. We overload it and aim it at their flagship. It'll destroy us too, but it's the only way." The bridge fell silent. The crew exchanged uneasy glances, but no one argued. They all knew the stakes. "Do it," Lyra said finally. "For Earth." The crew sprang into action, rerouting power to the cannon and preparing for the final strike. Elias took the helm, guiding the flagship toward the Dominion's command ship. The enemy's weapons fired relentlessly, their plasma blasts tearing through the Resistance fleet. Ships exploded around them, their crews lost to the void. But Elias didn't falter. As they closed in, the Dominion flagship loomed ahead, its dark hull blotting out the stars. Elias could see the faint glow of its energy shields, a testament to its impenetrable defenses. "Cannon at 90% power," a technician reported. "Overload imminent." "Hold steady," Elias said, his hands gripping the controls. "Just a little closer." The Dominion flagship opened fire, its weapons striking the Resistance flagship's hull. The ship shuddered violently, and alarms blared as systems began to fail. "Shields down," someone shouted. "Hull integrity at 20%. Elias ignored the warnings, his focus entirely on the target. "Now," he barked. The quantum singularity cannon fired, its energy beam lancing through the void and striking the Dominion flagship. The enemy ship's shields flickered and failed, its hull buckling under the immense power of the blast. For a moment, it seemed to hang in space, a silent monument to the Dominion's tyranny. Then it exploded in a blinding flash of light, the shockwave rippling through the battlefield. The Resistance flagship was caught in the blast, its hull tearing apart as the overloaded cannon detonated. Elias felt the ship lurch, the bridge filling with smoke and sparks. He grabbed Lyra's hand, their eyes meeting in a final moment of solidarity. "We did it," he said, his voice barely audible over the chaos. The screen went dark as the flagship was consumed by the explosion. The story ends with the Dominion fleet in disarray, their command structure shattered. The remaining Resistance ships, though battered and broken, rallied to finish the fight. Humanity, inspired by Elias's sacrifice, rose up across the galaxy, breaking free from the chains of oppression. On Earth, a monument was erected in Elias's honor, a symbol of humanity's resilience and defiance. The chains of soul were broken, and the galaxy would never forget the price of freedom.